This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and this morning I'm with Colonel Patrick Crowley of the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. Good morning, Patrick.
Good morning, Martin. Very good to be with you.
Thank you. And Patrick has written a book about the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment called The Infantry Diehards. And just to explain, we share some background. We both served with the Army Cadet Force unit at St. Peter's School here at Merrow, and afterwards we both joined the regiment, but in different battalions. Our service overlapped, but never in the same unit. So I just thought I'd fill the readers in on that, Patrick.
No, well, thank you. When I was at school, Martin was about four years ahead of me, and as I joined the cadets as a very young 12, 13-year-old, I think Martin was in the old sixth form, about to leave.
Yes, I suppose that's right. Yes, I do remember. I remember you being a cadet corporal.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get on to this book. So, what is the new book about?
Well, it's taking the heritage of the local regiment and going back in time through a series of stories. The local regiment, the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, springs from a series of other infantry regiments from the southeast of England. If you grew up in Guildford many years ago, then you might have joined the Queen's Royal West Surrey Regiment. That was amalgamated with the other Surrey Regiment, the East Surreys. And then as time went on, all the regiments of the southeast combined. And in 1992, the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment was formed. Okay, and
so you've explained a bit about the regimental background there, and of course the Queen's Depot was in Guildford in Stoughton. Now, what was the actual motivation for writing this book?
Well, nothing like it's been done before from a modern regiment's perspective. It gets very complicated for people who don't know the army very much, but it was the amalgamation of 7 big regiments formed the current one. And so what this does is do one chapter explaining what the infantry is all about. And the infantry has traditionally always recruited from regions in the country, but it tells you about what the infantry are all about, and then goes through about 14 stories through history of what the forebear regiments were well known for and with certain stories. And so I pick out the main stories and highlight what amazing achievements people made over centuries.
Okay, now before we go into the stories themselves, how important do you think in the modern world that these regional associations still are to our infantry regiments?
They're really important. Infantry regiments are still very much recruiting from local areas. So again, as I said, as I grew up and you grew up, we joined our local regiment, which at that stage was the Queen's Regiment. Nowadays, someone would join the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. But a regiment is made up of a family. And so you have the regular full-time soldiers, if you like, and then you have the part-timers who up until fairly recently were called the Territorial Army and now are the Army Reserve. And so we have one battalion that has locations in Surrey as part-timers. So that's the 4th Battalion, which is at Redhill and Farnham. And then, of course, there's connections with the veterans. So there are many people who still live in the county who served in our regiment, perhaps with a different name, but still in the same regiment in the past. And then you've got their families. And then, of course, you've got youngsters who join the local youth organisation, Army Cadet Force, not part of the army, but dress in uniform and are managed by the army, but very much a youth organisation. And they, in Surrey, including the Guildford area, wear the cap badge for the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment as well. So it's a wider family than just perhaps the full-time soldiers that people think of normally.
Yes, and you use the word family there, and I know as a soldier and a veteran that there is still a family feel about a regiment. There is a lot of loyalty that goes on after your active service.
Absolutely, and there's the connection to the area, but the thing that people miss the most, of course, are their mates, their friends. And there's a great bond of friendship that grows between people who are pulled together in adversity. And the stories in this book tell you about a number of people who really pulled together in adversity.
Okay, so that's a nice link in there to the story. So can you give us an example of the kind of camaraderie you were speaking about, the regimental camaraderie?
No, certainly. We can take it from different periods of history. For example, one of our local battalions, which was a Guildford based battalion from the Queen's Royal West Surreys, fought, for example, in Burma in the Second World War, and they were Chindits. And they had a 350-mile march into Burma through thick jungle and over incredible terrain to fight the Japanese, for example. And when you are in those sorts of conditions, you achieve amazing things. And to travel that distance through jungle with little to supply you apart from supplies from the air, and then to fight the enemy and come back. There's an example of one of the stories in the book, which is very local indeed. Another story linked to that is from another forebear regiment, the Queen's Own Royal West Kents. And then we have a story there of Lance Corporal Jack Harmon, who won the Victoria Cross storming Japanese enemy machine gun position, which was happening in Kohima. So there's a Second World War example of heroism, if you like, but also teamwork and people working together to achieve the result they want. But I go back further in time. I go back actually through Northern Ireland, much more recently, Iraq, Afghanistan, but further back as well, right back to the 17th century. The Queen's Royal Regiment, or the 2nd of Foot, the first of the local regiments, was raised on Putney Heath. Putney, of course, in those days would have been in Surrey. This is 1661. And so I tell the story of how they serve under a general called Percy Kirk in Tangier in North Africa. And so there are stories in there all the way from that 17th century first operational tour, if you like, all the way through to Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, in Afghanistan, all our forebear regiments have been involved in all the 4 conflicts. And so there were 3 wars in Afghanistan through the 19th century and 20th century. And then there was the more recent conflict. And all our forebears have been involved in that as well. But if we go right up to date, another more modern one is Iraq. And the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment has one of only 2 serving Victoria Cross winners, who is Colour Sergeant Johnson Bahari, VC. And he achieved amazing things for his compatriots in Iraq by being a driver of a Warrior armoured infantry fighting vehicle and basically making decisions that helped save the lives of many of his fellow comrades, if you like, in that vehicle. So throughout history, amazing things have been achieved, and often soldiers and what they do and what the servicemen do is forgotten until you need them. And perhaps you could say the same has happened recently, where suddenly we've had soldiers on the streets helping with the COVID mobile testing units, for example. But sometimes or often soldiers are overseas doing tasks and are forgotten. So what this book tries to do is bring some of those stories through time to people's attention.
Good. And how can, hopefully you've whetted people's appetites. So how can people obtain a copy of this book?
Well, they have to send a message to a chap called Henry Thomas, who is based down in Canterbury at Leros Barracks. If I give you his details, it's Henry Thomas.
What I'll do is, I'll include them in the script that goes with the interview, so people can just hopefully click on the link. Okay,
brilliant. That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for telling us about your book today, and good luck with its sales. And I hope to see you at the Remembrance Service if I'm allowed to attend, given the numbers restrictions in November.
Thank you very much, Martin.